Brian O'Leary is Executive Director of the Book Industry Study Group, a US-based trade association that works to create a more informed, effective, and efficient book industry supply chain. He oversees the work BISG does to disseminate information, create and implement standards, conduct research, and grow membership from companies working throughout the supply chain. Please welcome Brian O'Leary.
We're going to get started quickly with an overview provided by Andreas Park, the University of Toronto, just a kind of a primer on blockchain, because we recognize people come from a variety of different backgrounds and experiences on this.
When I was asked by the organizers to give a presentation on blockchain for the book industry, I was a little concerned because, I thought, I know nothing about publishing, which is both entirely true and totally ridiculous, considering that my entire life as an academic is about publishing. But here we are anyway. So before I start, let me ask you, how many of you actually own a cryptocurrency? Or who owns any Bitcoin here? Oh, okay. Anybody holds Ethereum? Okay, that's quite a lot of people. I'm impressed. I should say I got interested in blockchain technology about 3 years ago, which is ridiculously short period of time if you think about it, but in this blockchain world, it's an eternity. So people talk about things that happened 3 months ago as in the ancient past. So just so you know how fast this world works. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the concept that underlies cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum that you may have heard about already. So if I want to do it in a very boring way, the way to say it is that what a blockchain really is at its core is a digital ledger. Now, it's just something really boring if you think about it, because a ledger is just a record of transactions, messages, contracts, and the like. But there's some very special features to blockchains which are noteworthy and which make this a transformative technology as far as I'm concerned. So first off, this ledger is not kept at a central location, like a central database, but it is at many locations. Also, this is not just a set of databases, but it's referred to as a distributed ledger, so a distributed database. So copies of the same ledger are kept all over the world. In Bitcoin at about 8,000 different nodes, in Ethereum at about 30,000 different nodes. So now, how does this work? So as I said, a blockchain records transactions. So first we need to understand what's special about blockchain by understanding a transaction. So we have Alice and Bob here. Alice wants to buy a car from Bob. All right, so Alice wants to pay Bob money. So how does she do it? Well, she basically writes a contract and then signs the contract with a cryptographic key so that this contract is therefore digitally locked. And that is essentially transactions that we think about and that are recorded on this ledger. Now, one special feature is that an attacker, somebody who wants to be an imposter and tries to steal her money, because of the high level of encryption, will not have the ability to steal from her. Now, we have these transactions, and there are many of these transactions. And what we do with them, what a blockchain does, is they form them and group them together in blocks. So that's where the term block comes from. And we have many of these. And a special feature which makes it a chain is as follows. There is information included in all of these blocks, which are essentially digests of information. So you have a digest of information in the first block at the bottom here. This is basically a summary of all the information that is included in a block. And the best way to think about the workings of it is that the last entry, this digest, in one block is part of the header of the top of the next block. So there's a direct link between these blocks directly. Now, the crucial part about it is the moment you want to manipulate or change any of the entries that are part of a block, you would change the digest, and then the digest that links from this block, what happened? Oh, hold on, sorry. The digest that links from the block down here to the next block would no longer be compatible, and the network would reject such a manipulation. So that is an additional feature of certainty, and what that creates is the link, which is the chain. So these blocks are therefore chained together. Now I should say that the cryptography and this link of blocks is not sufficient to establish the security of the blockchain. There's one extra feature, and that is essentially economic incentives. If you want to change the blockchain, if you want to work on it, and if you want to do work on it, you have to expense resources. Now, if you may have heard about this, and if you're on the critical part about the technology, you've heard of the large energy wastage that is associated with, for instance, in particular, Bitcoin. Essentially, this is the proof of work protocol which creates it. It's the economic portion of it which secures the chain. So it's cryptography together with economic incentives. Very crucial concept. Now, let me put this into perspective. So I've just explained to you what the technology is. Let me explain what that actually does. If you think back through the history of mankind, if we want to have commercial relations, we need trust. This is extremely central feature of all institutions, of many of the institutions that we see in the world. We have laws, we have contracts, and we have banks. The main reason and one of the critical features of a bank is that it establishes trust of your deposits, of contracts that are being made. Even identities like passports is a level of trust that you have the person in front of you is the person that you claim that they are. Now, the premise of a blockchain is completely different. Number one, it is something which is not controlled by any one entity, person, or organization. If you think of any of the institutions that we have, such as they're always controlled by something, somebody, or an organization. Blockchains are controlled by nobody. They're owned by nobody. Secondly, everybody can participate. Now, bad people and good people can use a blockchain. It's open to anybody. And the third, and this is really crucial, is that it's entirely trustless. There is no trust needed because everything, so the only thing that you would trust in is something that you can verify. The code of a blockchain is open source. The information on the blockchain is available to everybody. The trust is established essentially by transparency. Now, what do we get from that? What we get from that is a decentralized internet of value. If you think of internet such as it is, what it really is an internet of information. And if I want to transfer, say, a file to anybody here, what I would send you is a copy of that file. Now, if we think about money or something of value, that's not going to be good enough because if I send you a copy, I just basically spend the same amount of money over and over again. So in order to have that ability to transfer value, we need special features. And that is essentially what a blockchain as a technology enables. Now, one of the strongest features, and this is what is of most interest, I assume, for this audience here, is that you could have digital, enforceable, and automatically executed contracts that you can write. So, for instance, for intellectual property, for property rights transfers and the like, you could have contracts that you can trust that they will be executed, that money transfers will occur based on the code which is written and executed by the blockchain. What that all enables us is there's a lot of control that people gain now. You gain control over your property rights. You gain control over your intellectual rights. You can gain control over your own data, be it medical data, identity data, and so on and so forth. The possibilities are huge, and I wouldn't say endless, but vast. But there's also loss of control involved. Tax collection gets difficult on a decentralized worldwide ledger. Law enforcement gets difficult. You can have rogue states like North Korea, dictators, pornographers. Any number of bad people can use this blockchain. There is no limit to it. So, instead of rejecting it, I would recommend that we think really hard of how we handle it. And that's basically most of what I want to say. Transformations will be huge. The banking industry, the accounting industry, and the legal industry all will change in the wake of this technological transformation. And that's all I have to say for now. Thank you.
Before we turn it over to the panel, I wanted to explain, Madelyn Chang was also on this, scheduled to be part of this, but she had an unavoidable commitment on the West Coast, and BookNet Canada looked at a variety of different options to include her, but they were all technologically not really great. So we're sorry to miss her today. I think that she has a really interesting story, and if you're interested, she tells a little bit of background on a post that she created for BookNet Canada, I think in December. So it's up on the site. So simon-pierre, you actually also wrote for BookNet Canada and talked a little bit about a distributed ledger for ebooks, a way to monetize on independent platforms. And I'm wondering if you can talk to this group and also to your fellow panelists about what your idea is, how it might work, and where you are on it right now.
Yes, so thank you, Brian. So yes, at Cenarex, we are building right now an affordable solution that will protect ebooks using blockchain technology. So we call it Bookshine solution. And basically what it will bring, it will increase the security of ebooks by providing to the ebook owner a universal access right to their ebooks. It's also going to bring additional traceability functionalities, as we've seen in the previous presentation. When you have access to a blockchain, you can have access to all sort of traceability visibility over your ebook. So authors and publishers will be able to see basically what happened to their books. The additional functionality of our solution, which is the key here, is the sharing possibility of an ebook. So an owner of an ebook using a blockchain solution will be able to either resell his book or he could lend it to someone, to someone he knows. Of course, this needs to be done with the authorization of the author or the publisher. So in our solution, when an author or a publisher publish a book, they have to sign a contract and they have to decide if the owner of their books or their ebooks basically will have the right to resell it or lend it. So if they gave the permission, our solution encrypted in the blockchain will manage the redistribution of the rights through the resale with the author, the publisher, and of course the sellers who sold the ebook. So of course, I was letting you know that we are building the solution. We have already built a prototype in 2017, and we are now in the phase of building the minimal viable product. It should be launched this year in August, so it will be available to all authors and publishers who want to participate. Of course, this is not a simple solution, and we know that there are roadblocks ahead of us. But we believe that blockchain is the way of the future, and we intend to make sure that we will be one of the first in that sector and bring that to the publishing industry. We are also willing to share what we are doing. So we had discussion yesterday and the day before with WC3. And we are going to be members of WC3 in order to put in place the standards of what we are doing and also share part of what we are doing with everybody. As we were talking earlier, blockchain is considered open source, so that's what we are also intending to do with our solution, at least part of it. So basically, in a nutshell, that was it.
Do you have a timeline? I mean, do you have a sense of when you're going to be public with this?
Yes, exactly. That's what I was saying. So basically, we are developing the solution right now. And in August, if everything goes well, we should have a first minimal viable product on the market. Of course, after that, we'll continue to build on it and improve the solution with the users that will participate in our first version of the product.
And I was kind of curious, have you thought about how you get the data to populate? Because there's a lot of information you're thinking about with respect to rights, territories, and the like.
Absolutely. So there's two basically type of blockchain. You have private blockchain and you have public blockchain. So the difference is mainly because a public blockchain, when you do a public blockchain, it's really secured on a network that's only accessible by those who build it. And you only, if they give you access to it, you can access it. Then you have the public blockchains that are already available. There's assumptions right now. People are thinking that, okay, if I'm using a public blockchain, I absolutely need to use cryptocurrency, or my end user needs to pay in cryptocurrency. That's not necessarily the truth, because you can build around it an interface that your end user or your customer will pay using their local currency, and then after that you can manage it by yourself and transform that into cryptocurrency of the public blockchain. So for example, in our case, we're using Ethereum, but our customers will be able to pay with their local currency, and will manage the conversion in order to pay the miners or the network with their own cryptocurrency. So of course, there is still issues with the data that we store in blockchains. It's very heavy right now. It takes a lot of time. So the idea at first is to say that only the rights will be stored on the blockchain and not the content of an ebook. Otherwise, it would take way too much volume. It would cost too much also for the customers. So that's the way we're going to build it. It's really to put in place security with blockchain, but not the content of it.
Although Andreas's survey suggests that there's a lot of cryptocurrency floating around the room, so maybe we get a shot there. Andreas or Stephen, any thoughts on this before?
So I'm wondering, I think this is a great idea, and it's exactly what I was alluding to of how this can be used and how this, in my opinion, also empowers authors in particular to have stronger power over their digital rights. There's already musicians who use the technology for similar purposes. I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts of how this will actually change the relation of authors with, say, publishers?
Well, the relationship will definitively change. So, to my opinion, publisher need to start thinking differently in order to get into that space. So, I cannot tell you exactly what it will be. I think it's to the publishing industry to really think how they want to address that. But I mean, any publisher in that room should start thinking about it, because if you're not thinking about it, you might get bypassed in a few years. And I can do a parallel a bit. I did my bachelor degree in '93, from '93 to '98, and I studied the internet birth and rise. And I remember at that time we were saying the exact same thing that we're saying with blockchain right now. So the network is not sorry, the network is not strong enough, it's not secure enough, or any other excuses were good for people not to get into that space. But then after that, you know, internet is history, and we know that we cannot live without it right now. So blockchain, we're starting to see the exact same patterns. So I don't have a crystal ball there. I cannot predict the future. But what I can tell you is that if you do not look at it right now, you might end up in a bad position in the future.
I definitely like the analogy to the internet of the 1990s. It seems like with blockchain technology today, we are like in the days of dial-up, and there is some limitations. But like the internet, how it progressed, a lot of us believe that that's going to be happening with blockchain too. So. My question was more about, like, how are you onboarding these different rights holders, like publishers or authors? How are they uploading their books? How's that working?
It will be through an interface that we will build. So it's a web interface where they will basically download their ebook.
Yeah.
Right now, our solution will work with EPUB version 3. So there are codes that will be attached to the ebook in order to be distributed through the blockchain.
Right.
Are you thinking about metadata as well?
Yeah, but also just more on the rights side. Publishers tend to have better information on the rights of the author and the publisher. So often it's the publisher that you want to be onboarding because of their vast catalog and that kind of knowledge that they have. In my experience, authors often don't have good information about the rights. Like, they're like, can I do this with my own work? And they don't even know, especially in academic fields. So I was just wondering how that worked. And also, when we get talking about our own project, we had some speed bumps with regards to uploading works and the onboarding part of it. So.
Yeah, I don't want to, I want to go to you next, because, but that is an interesting observation. If you're an ebook creator, particularly a third party, you're not going to necessarily, you're going to know something about the book, but you're certainly not going to know rights. And so figuring out that workflow is probably critically important.
So if you don't mind, I have another question actually for you guys, which is that, so we have the authors, we have the publishers, and potentially also illustrators and others whose rights can be probably used very well in this front. But so there's a big question about what happens to bookstores like Amazon and the like, because there's the ebooks. They sell ebooks at the moment. But it seems to me there will possibly be no longer necessary. Is that the path of the future, or do we see bundling of services again?
I think they can still be usefulness of having a bookstore, because it's not necessarily, it doesn't mean that you use a blockchain technology to distribute your book, that you will have the market power to publicize it and bring people to buy it. So in that sense, to me, it makes a lot of sense that your starting point for selling your ebook that is protected by blockchain could be a usual store of ebooks. But of course, that means that you need to convince the Amazon of this world to jump into that with you, which is probably not an easy task. But that could be a potential solution.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's going to be bookstores in the future, and I don't think it will change that much, maybe in the sense that bookstores in the future, I think, will need to get on to the blockchain movement or be disrupted. I do think that. But you need an aggregator and a place, a storefront, in order to be finding this content. The authors and publishers just can't publish content just to the website because it's not as visible as it would be in an online bookstore. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So turning to you for last fall, BookNet Canada asked me to write something about a potential use case for blockchain in publishing. And I did a piece that's also up on the site that talked about potential rights applications.
Yeah.
Access Copyright actually in parallel has been building prototyping and building something of its own. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it started last summer that we started working on a proof of concept using a blockchain application, specifically on the public Ethereum platform. And it was, what we were trying to do was a research project. We're not necessarily proving like a business model or this kind of thing. We need to get our hands dirty into how this technology works in order to really understand it. And that turned out to be really true because we learned a lot. And we wanted to cut through, the hype around blockchain, like what is really happening, what's really beneficial here, as opposed to, these messages that are coming out that blockchain can solve everything. So what we did is we created like, similar to what you're talking about, like it's a platform where you would upload a book, and then you could actually, within that platform, sell the book peer-to-peer to the customer. So the money would be flowing directly within seconds from the customer's wallet, their Ethereum wallet, into the wallet of the author and the publisher. And it happens like over a few seconds. So that peer-to-peer payments is something new and different because there isn't the intermediaries that are taking a cut when those payments are made. So that we found is very powerful. The other thing is when you're uploading a work, you can define the amount of editions or copies of that work, which is something that, of course, can't be done in today's internet of copy and paste. So because of the smart contract application, you can actually define, like, I only want there to be like 100, 1,000, 1 million copies of the work. So you can create scarcity in your asset and therefore value, as opposed to our current internet of like, I have a PDF, I email it to you, you have it and I have it, you email it again and now everybody has it. This is very different in the blockchain space where there's a finite asset that gets moved around. So that is also very powerful. And the last part that we were looking at was if somebody bought the book and on the platform were to tell someone else about it, and that other person bought the book, that the initial purchaser would share in the revenue stream. So it's this way of getting the fans involved in trying to promote books, and then they could share in the revenues. So those were the sort of 3 things that we wanted to tackle in the proof of concept. And what we sort of found was, which was really exciting, was these smart contracts on the blockchain, like all these aspects worked. What was difficult though was the payments are somewhat slow. Like when you buy the book, you have to wait 30, 40 seconds, as opposed to our Visa world where we're used to these instant transactions. And also when uploading a book, you know, for initializing that smart contract requires a lot of fees on the Ethereum platform. So we were quite surprised to find that when we're uploading a book that it's costing like $50, $60 Canadian to put it on the Ethereum platform, even though the book itself is sitting in a regular standard database. It's the smart contract that's being initialized and uploaded. Because blockchain offered this promise of like, we're gonna have all these micropayments and you're gonna be able to, you know, buy your coffees and have these small fees, and you're gonna be able to, when you get to a newspaper, you know, website, be able to read that article for 1 cent and all these kinds of things. And as things got more popular, the fees went up, and these sort of dreams have sort of vanished, maybe temporarily, in things like Bitcoin and Ethereum. But what we sort of realized in doing this project was there's some fundamental problems when, you know, for this uploading a book is, do we actually know who this creator is? And is it actually their work that they're uploading? So you need to sort of authenticate the authors and the users. You know, are these the actual people? Is this actually Margaret Atwood, who's the one who's uploading her work? Because if you're doing peer-to-peer payments, you know, the right author better be at the other end. Otherwise, the system kind of doesn't work, right? And the right publisher better be at the right end of it in the same thing. So that was something that we noticed is a problem, and there are a lot of people in the blockchain space that are looking at fixing that, at creating identity systems that work. But then the other issue is it their work that they're uploading? So is it actually The Handmaid's Tale that Margaret Atwood is putting on, or is it something else that doesn't really belong to her? And we see these as big problems because we live in our YouTube age where, you know, people are uploading stuff that doesn't belong to them, and even sometimes monetizing it. And as blockchain solutions are becoming more prominent, we found that other solutions are taking these issues for granted, that this is my content and I'm uploading it and I should get paid for it. But as you're uploading content to a blockchain which is immutable, you create an even bigger problem that there's something fixed on a blockchain, and it makes it more difficult to fix than it is in today's world.
So you really have to get it right at the start.
That's it. So just to finish,
thing,
like it's like a database, right? So it's junk in, junk out. If you have bad data to begin with, you're going to have a bad database.
Okay.
So
and does publishing have a really good legacy of getting it right at the start? That's not. Do you want to weigh in on part of that?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to maybe just add a little bit of context and background there. So, so you've been talking about the fees. So just so you understand that the way it works on Ethereum is you pay per programming cycle. So think about it, you have a pocket calculator, every time you press a key, you pay for that, essentially, right? And so a contract actually has relatively large number of programming cycles, and this is why you have to pay a high fee. And the speculation in Bitcoin, Ethereum didn't help because, you know, all of a sudden these assets or these tokens were extremely expensive, and it's kind of against the whole idea of being able to use it on a frequent basis. Now there are solutions that are being proposed to make it faster and cheaper again, and we're hoping that this will eventually happen. So sit tight for that one, but don't hold your breath. So then the second thing I wanted to, and I forgot actually what I want to say. So the very big issue with blockchains is the following. I kept talking about it as trustless, right? And it works indeed where anything that is on the blockchain, it works automatically, and it is immutable, and it's secure, and, you know, this is all hunky-dory. But every time you have to have an interface with the real world, as you say, it gets actually very difficult. And this is, you know, so there's one way to think about it is the blockchain, you can do anything that you can explain to an alien. right? So and I literally mean extraterrestrial. But if you want to do anything that we do in the real world, which has humans in it, which has potential fraud in it, then it gets actually very, very difficult to have that done in the same manner such as it is. People are working on that, but somebody being an imposter for Margaret Atwood, this has not yet been resolved. Last thing I want to say, this is, however, the big opportunity for digital identities. So I'm personally a big fan of that idea. I've lived in Denmark for a year where I had a digital identity which allowed me to do everything. Bank accounts, anything I had to do with the government and so on was great. And I sincerely hope that we get that here in Canada, yesterday, so that we can use it for all kinds of these purposes. And then you can actually link that too with the as a very secure way of using outside world data.
My question, you all alluded to, there's two big that I've been encountering with some of our blockchain work. Clearly environmental issues, and I'd be curious about you elaborating on that. The other thing that that keeps me awake at night is when we take out the middleman and we want to do any kind of commerce where there has been traditionally taxes involved. There are no taxes involved because there's no government entity involved. We're talking about big, powerful entities that are getting stripped out of things. What do you think the potential backlash of that would be?
Okay, probably start with Andreas.
Yeah, so the environmental impact is a huge concern, and I think it's atrocious how much energy is currently being used. You may have heard about it that the Bitcoin blockchain now uses more power, more electricity than Iceland, and it's just crazy.
Small country.
Now, when Ethereum was set up and when it was designed, there was always the idea of moving over to a system which does not require this proof of work protocol which consumes all the energy. They wanted to move to what's referred to as a proof of stake protocol. Technologically and mathematically, that's actually a hard problem to solve, and so far it has not been successfully implemented, but they're working on it, and there is currently a version of proof of stake working as a test net. And I have some higher hopes that it eventually works out, and that actually will solve a gazillion problems there.
But there is some potential issues with proof of stake that get brought up in the sense that proof of stake is like weighted on individuals that have to stake their coins on approving transactions, and if they do it wrong and maliciously, they lose all their coins. So some people in the Bitcoin sort of side of it look at Ethereum and is like, don't you sort of have this problem that the rich are getting richer as far as proof of stake is happening? And that's maybe partly why it's sort of taking so long for proof of stake to get rolled out. But there is definitely things being looked at to solve this energy problem, because it's, pretty gross.
And simon-pierre or Stephen, what are you thinking about with respect to tax obligations? Is this something you're kind of sorting through?
Yeah, definitely. We need to ensure that we go with the regulations of countries, but of course it gets complicated when you have an individual selling a book to another individual in another country, for example. So it's a bit complex. In North America, there is some rules that we can play with. It's not necessarily the case all over the world. And unfortunately, we cannot restrict the network to a certain area of the world. So it's going to be challenging for sure.
In fact, I would imagine that, for example, in rights applications, restricting it to a specific part of the world would be contrarian to the purpose.
Yes, absolutely.
You want a rising tide where people discover and can purchase and/or sell rights to people that otherwise would not otherwise have them.
Exactly. So I think as far as blockchain is concerned, sovereign areas of influence in terms of the rights that are put into a smart contract are over. I think the governments have to actually face that reality and work towards it and try to understand how they can deal with it. I know the reaction and the instinct is to say, well, we can't have this, it's illegal, we can't have anything like that. But you can't stop a blockchain. It's not possible. It's a distributed ledger, it's everywhere. How are you going to stop that? It's not It's not technologically feasible unless you force people to switch off their computers.
Yeah.
So, in that sense, and your point is very well taken. We have to pay our taxes, right? But the government clearly loses control, and they have to find ways how they can operate without that control. Now, I would argue there's actually some positive here because it enables people, right? So the government, the banking sector, for instance, and I'm from finance, can be extremely oppressive so take the Ethereum Foundation that founded a blockchain here and an amazing product here in Canada. And these guys couldn't get a bank account in Canada to operate it and to start it. Can you believe that? Now, what did they do? They went to Switzerland because Switzerland actually provided them with the opportunity for it. That's a huge loss for Canada. And it came from oppressive regulation and from oppressive banks.
Steve?
I also just wanted to come back to the question about backlash and intermediaries. I got an email from Scotiabank a couple of weeks ago that was like, you can't use your credit card to buy crypto anymore, just so you know. So that was, I found that somewhat not surprising, but never have I gotten an email from a bank saying you can't buy something that's completely legal. Like I found that really, really strange. So that's an example of an industry that's being disrupted, and they're trying to fight it by not allowing you to interact with what's disrupting them. So that's one way to go about it. But the better way is to evaluate the technology and see how you can use it to make your business better.
Okay, thanks. Other questions? All right, there were a number of things that we actually were looking at, some of the pre-reading that we were given. Talked about a range of applications, some of which we talked about today, but things like credentialing, enhanced metadata exchange, tracking sales and rights for digital-first products. These all seem like pretty credible use cases for us. I mean, what's your perspective on it? I'll start with Simon-Pierre.
So basically, the whole idea of the blockchain brings so much new possibilities for so much different industries. It's hard to get our head around it. So basically, I believe that really the markets that will benefit the most out of it are the markets that really needs what we were talking earlier about the access rights, basically, or the identification. So if for whatever reason you have a process where you have that type of rights or need for a right, then a blockchain solution could be a good idea for you. But of course, right now, like we were saying, if you need a database to store a lot of information, that might not be the right place to go.
Yeah. So metadata becomes kind of problematic in that regard,
Yes.
because it is data intensive.
Exactly, yeah.
I just, based on what Simon-Pierre was saying, was I do feel, though, if you get the authentication right and you get the attribution right, the asset, the ebook or song, music, it can become a business onto itself. It can sell itself. It can license itself. It can license content. If it's an ebook and you want to just copy like a chapter out of it, you can do that as long as it's all coded within the smart contract. You can have very sophisticated licensing schemes, which can all happen in almost real time in an automated peer-to-peer way. If you want to have different pricing for different kinds of customers, whether consumer or corporate, you can do all these kinds of things. And it offers a lot of opportunity to be doing things much more efficiently and ultimately having more money come back to the creators and publishers because of that.
That's kind of the rising tide argument, that the market becomes broader rather than just simply transactionally done more efficiently.
Yeah.
We have Trish McCraney, who's leading our rights committee at Book Industry Study Group, is giving a presentation one of those places, and right now. But that's part of the work that they're doing, is thinking through those use cases. Quick thought on this, or?
Look, I don't know enough about your industry. The way to
sorry,
think about it is, whenever there's a middleman who is there to, make sure that the left side does what the right side does, like an accountant. So those middlemen can be cut out, and they're expensive. So that's good, I would argue.
We have just about a minute left, but maybe one quick takeaway. We have a quick question, Robert.
I think, I mean, you spoke a little bit about the prospect of blockchain as a democratizing and decentralized technology. In the last few years, we've seen the outcome of a lot of democratizing and decentralized technologies that have actually been used to enhance the capabilities of exclusion and oppression and entrenching the status quo. And I think we've learned that much of that could have been mitigated or prevented if the people working early on potential use cases or product design had access to perspectives other than their own. And so I'm curious, in the work that each of you do you feel like you have access to those perspectives?
Well, I guess I feel that on true public blockchains, I'm not as concerned with maybe those considerations, because if it's being, you know, the proof of work and the mining is happening truly around the world by different players, then it will be distributed and therefore democratic. The problem can be is happening on the Bitcoin blockchain, as the arms race to use more and more energy to be doing the proof of work, that there's only a select group of users that are actually doing the mining and doing the work and sustaining the network, and therefore it becomes less decentralized, excuse me, and therefore more open to the issues that you are maybe considering. So it is a problem as far as the way things can work, and I think it's just having hope that things work the way that you want them to. Yeah.